Major General Augustus Leon Collins' illustrious career in the military has come to an end. The Adjutant General of Mississippi retired from the National Guard at the end of August. His 35 years of service included commanding the Guard's 155th Brigade Combat Team during Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2005. Governor Bryant called General Collins a soldier, and now this soldier is ready for a well-deserved break. It's always good to see you. Congratulations on a fantastic career. And you know, they say old soldiers never die, they just fade away. But you're not truly going to fade away. I mean, you've started a new job, you're getting to go. What are you doing now besides your wife Deborah's to-do list?
Well, I'll be going to Minac Incorporated. It's a corporation that's home-based here in Jackson, Mississippi, and I'll be the CEO of that corporation.
Excellent. I think you could probably handle being a CEO okay at this point.
Well, I've had a little bit of experience.
You've had a little bit of experience. Of course, being the Adjutant General of Mississippi means that you have over 12,000 citizen soldiers under your charge, and you've done that successfully. Talk about that for a second. What was probably your fondest memory of your service as Adjutant General?
Well, obviously, you mentioned the time that I was commander of the 155th Brigade Combat Team. That is obviously the highlight of my career, having the opportunity to serve our state and our nation in combat and serve alongside those men and women who wore that Dixie Thunder patch, as well as the men and women on active duty that I also had the opportunity to command. For a year, downrange, nothing that I've done in the military quite compares to that.
Well, talk about that experience, because it was not something you really expected. Brigadier General Ben Gaston was going to take the troops over, and he did his physical, and he had a heart condition, and so therefore you got the call, and it was almost like the quarterback coming off the bench at the last second. That had to be a little bit of a shock.
Right. Right now, I'm an armor officer by trade,
yeah.
But I also have a secondary specialty of being a personnel officer.
Yeah.
At the time, I was the state personnel officer for the Mississippi Military Department, and I had actually been out of town at a conference. I remember getting in late one Wednesday night from that conference, and the next morning, Thursday morning, General Cross calls me over to his office, and he informs me then that General Gaston had a medical problem that was going to prevent him from being able to deploy overseas, and he says, "Well, you're going to have to take the brigade." So it was quite a shock, going from being a personnel officer now to going back to being an armor officer again, and also having the command of such a large organization, because the 155th is the single largest unit in the state of Mississippi.
Yeah, it was like you had like 5,000 troops under you, didn't you, at that time?
At the height of our deployment, I had about 5,000 troops. We were assigned to the Marine Expeditionary Force, the 2nd MEF, while we were there. We weren't assigned to a higher Army command. We were assigned to the Marines.
So how did that work out? Because I know sometimes there can be some inter-service rivalry.
Well, it can, but I got to tell you, it worked out really well. I mean, the Marines treated us extremely well, and they welcomed us into their fold. I remember when I first got there, the 1st MEF was the command that we fell under. And when we first got there, Lieutenant General Sadler was the commander, and I remember him coming down to our headquarters, and there was a map on the board there. He says, "Leon, now this is the area that you're responsible for," and he laid out the provinces of Najaf, Karbala, North Babel, and an eastern portion of Al Anbar. He says, "Now, my headquarters is going to be over here," and he pointed on the map. He says, "Call me if you need me."
And that was during, some of the most difficult times of the Iraqi campaign. That was when we were seeing the insurgency come up, and it was, that was kind of called the Triangle of Death, that area you were in.
It actually was. That northern part of our area of operation was part of that Triangle of Death. From Baghdad down to Iskandariya over to Fallujah and Ramadi, that area. It was a bad place, and 2005 was a bad time. The interesting part about 2005 was that you had a lot of reserve component soldiers in theater at that time. Our active component divisions and brigades had deployed. It was time to rotate them out. And because our military is so small, you had to rely on the National Guard and Army Reserve. So we had a lot of Reserve and National Guard soldiers on the ground at that time, at a time when it was really bad.
That was really tough too, because I think the type of warfare that you trained for early in your service was against the Soviets, or against somebody at least you knew had a uniform. Right. I mean, and so this was a whole different kind of warfare for you.
It was. I mean, we had trained for so many years where it was like the old type of war where you had one organization on one side of the field, the other organization on the other side, and you fought. You came to the middle and fought. Well, that wasn't the type of war that we were fighting back in 2005. Insurgents looked just like the folks from the general population. Now, one of the things that we did have to do is to become friends with the folks who lived in the areas that we operated in. And many times, because of the friendships that we were able to develop with the locals, we were able to find insurgents. When someone new would come into town, we'd get a notification that this person doesn't belong here. Something's going on. So we were able to kind of find those folks and get them cut out of the rest of the population.
And that really was during the surge, there was a sea change, because suddenly some of the outside foreign fighters got so cruel that the locals just turned around and said, no, we're going to help you. And so that was really about that time, but there was a lot of wounded deaths and deaths at that time. So it was a tough time to be in charge.
It was a tough time. And you're right, the local population, they're just like anybody else, just like folks you find here right here in Mississippi. All they want to do is be able to live in peace and raise their families. And because of the insurgency, it was disrupting that. So they were looking at some kind of way to get back to normalcy. Yeah. And we were the best opportunity for them to get that.
I love this quote from your son, that when you were faced with the challenge of having to deploy even behind your own troops, so you were coming in behind them, but he sent you this email and then this quote and said, if God brings you to it, he'll bring you through it. Yeah. And that was from Ben. How old was Ben when he sent you that? Benjamin
was probably about 12 years old at the time, and it was something that he normally didn't do, was forward me some type of email. Yeah. But so I got that one that day, and it was during the time, like you said, the brigade had already mobilized. They were already at Camp Shelby. They were going through their individual training and getting all their medical processing done by the time I caught up with them. So, I was trying to come up with plans to deploy a large formation, trying to get spun up on things that were going on in theater. Plus, I was having to do my own individual training and individual processing at the same time. So it was a lot on my plate in a very short period of time. And then one day that email shows up and says, if God brings you to it, he'll bring you through it. So to me, it was like God was speaking to me through this 12-year-old boy, telling me that, just, hey, everything's going to be okay. Just keep moving forward and everything will be all right.
And it worked out really well. You mentioned Camp Shelby, and I don't think a lot of Mississippians understand that over the last 15 years, Camp Shelby has been a major city in the United States. A lot of Guard comes in and out, and you were talking about how the tactics had changed in that war. Those tactics were taught at Camp Shelby, weren't they?
Absolutely, and we had to transform Camp Shelby to a certain extent to where we would be able to practice the tactics that we were going to use in Iraq and Afghanistan at Camp Shelby. Villages were built out in the training areas. We had role players that came in that simulated imams and sheiks. So the soldiers that came to Camp Shelby, not just Mississippi soldiers, but soldiers all across the United States came to Camp Shelby to train, to prepare to go to war.
Let's go back to the beginning, Boonville, Mississippi, when you were a kid. What do you think about your childhood that probably led you in the direction where you are today?
I don't know if there was anything in my childhood that led me to this point. The way I joined the National Guard, and everybody's heard this story, is because of a former football coach of mine. I'd been out of high school for 2 years, almost 2 years at this point, and I was driving a school bus as a part-time job.
See, that'll give you leadership experience right there.
Oh yeah, that job's a lot tougher than it looks. But he talked to me one afternoon. I was at the middle school waiting to pick up my kids, in the evening, and he was a member of the National Guard, which is something I didn't even know. And he says, well, we've got drill this weekend. Why don't you just come by and see what you think? And I went by and I spent the weekend with him, and I decided, I think I'll try to do this. Now, at the time, I thought, I'll sign up for 6 years.
Right.
I'll do my 6 years, and then I'll move on. But somehow that 6th-year anniversary seems like it just never came, and I just stayed in.
And 35 years later.
Yep,
35 years later. Didn't you and a friend go up to sign up together? What happened to your friend?
We got separated at some point during the day, and because they have sponsors. When you come in, somebody sponsors you and shows you around. Well, he had a sponsor also. And at the end of the day, I'd made it my mind that I was going to join. And I went ahead and signed all the paperwork and everything, and I saw him later. He says, well, I'm going to have to think about it. I said, think about it? I thought we were going to go in together. But he changed his mind.
Okay. Well, it turned out to be a very good decision for you, of course. But you went on, you went to community college, and then you graduated from Ole Miss with a business degree.
Right.
And then when you got your MBA.
Right. I got my MBA from Jackson State.
Jackson State. And you went to go work for the state at that point. You were the security commission.
Yeah, I was with the Employment Security Commission, right?
Yeah.
I worked with them for about 6.5 years after I got out of college. And then there was an opportunity for a full-time job with the National Guard with the Office of the Inspector General. And I interviewed for that job and was selected.
Isn't it funny, though, you think about everything that you've done in your life, how it kind of led up to where you are today. Yeah. And I think that the golden thread, just looking through your career, was something I think you truly believe in, is just the hard work that you've thrown in there.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I tell young people all the time. If you are where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to be there, doing what you're supposed to be doing, and doing it to the best of your ability, good things are going to happen. And I think that's one of the things that's helped me. It's just do what you're asked to do to the best of your ability.
What do you think your parents would think about you now and your career? Would they have been shocked when you were 6 years old that this is where you ended up?
They'd probably ask me, who are you and what'd you do with Leon? Because I just don't think that they would have ever thought that this was where I'd be at this point.
So how did the military, do you think, changed you?
Well, the structure that you get with the military, the discipline, and more than anything, the sense of belonging to a team. Because you cannot be in any of our military services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, or Coast Guard, without understanding what it means to be part of a team. Because you don't do anything on your own. There's always someone on your left or your right or your front or your back that's part of everybody accomplishing the mission.
When you're over 5,000 troops in a combat zone and you do lose troops and everything else, I mean, as a leader, I'd imagine you took that very personally, didn't you?
It's hard. I mean, because it causes you sometimes to second guess. If I had given different orders, if we'd had a different type of operation, if I'd had more troops in one place and less troops somewhere else, if things would have turned out differently. But I mean, it's part of combat. Yeah. When you go into combat, you don't want to lose anybody, but you always know that the chances of losing someone is going to be there. So you've got to, keep planning. You got to. It's like falling off of a bicycle. You got to get back on and ride again, and just know that you did the best that you could do given the resources that you had.
Looking back at all the different generals in history, I mean, do you consider yourself more an Eisenhower or a MacArthur or a Bradley or a Patton? Was there a general that you definitely probably not a Patton? I don't picture you as old blood and guts, but was there a particular general that you looked up to that you thought, you know what, I want to be like him?
Obviously, I'm a big admirer of Patton because I'm an armor officer.
Oh,
you can't be an armor officer without being an admirer of Patton.
That's part of the deal, exactly.
That's like one of those things that you sign and says, yes, I love Patton. But I would think that my style would be more along Ike, not comparing me to Ike. I mean, I'm not in the same class.
You don't play golf as much as he did either.
But I'm more of a laid back. Give my subordinates a mission, expect them to accomplish it. Without doing any unnecessary interfering with them trying to accomplish that mission. One
of the things I think that really struck me in your leadership style was when you were deployed in Iraq, that you didn't just stay in headquarters. I mean, you were out visiting your troops, all the different places they were, which of course put you at risk of IEDs, of some of the other things too. But that was, I think, once again, you were out there checking on your men and women to make sure they were okay.
Well, you have different types of leadership styles, and leaders have different ways of being able to understand what the battlefield is.
Yeah.
I'm not as smart as some of those other guys that I can stay in the headquarters and figure it out. My only way to understand what the enemy was doing was actually go to the different operating bases that we had, and at one point we had 7.
Yeah.
And actually go out on patrols with
wow.
with the soldiers when I was out there, just to kind of get a feel of what it is, what was going on out there. And that helped me understand what was happening, how the different areas, because down in the Jaf, that was a different type of situation that we had down there, as opposed to what we were dealing with up in Musaib and Iskandaria. So you had to have different plans for each one of those areas. And the only way to understand that is actually go and get on the ground with those soldiers.
How does that make you feel today when you sit there and see what ISIS has done in some of those same towns and cities that where you were before, and some of the chaos that's going on? I mean, that's got to be kind of tough to sit there and watch it kind of go downhill.
Well, it breaks my heart, because at the time we left in January of 2006, when we left Iraq, I really felt that the Iraqi security forces, their army and their police were on pretty good footing.
Yeah.
It appeared that they'd made a lot of great strides to where they would be able to defend and protect themselves.
Yeah.
And the fact that ISIS has been able to come in and wreak havoc disappoints me to an extent.
You've had a really good career in the last 4 years of being adjutant general, and it was quite an honor. Not only were you the first African American ever chosen for the job, in fact, you were the first African American ever to get a star, which I think is pretty impressive also. But I felt like this comment from Lieutenant General Russell Andre, of course, the hero of Katrina, after he came into New Orleans, was a very outspoken guy. He's not one of those kind of guys that's going to shoot rainbows and unicorns at you.
Right.
But he said that Leon is intelligent, articulate, a super communicator, and sees the big picture. He acts with initiative to accomplish the mission. That's pretty high praise.
Yeah, well, General Honore is an outstanding leader, as you said. I mean, he was, like you say, the hero of Katrina. He was a guy who brought a lot of organizations together to help with the bad situation that we had along the Gulf Coast as a result of the hurricane. General Honore was the first Army commander, and the 155th was really what we called his first cradle-to-grave mobilization of a large formation. When he came in as the first Army commander, we mobilized. So, when we initially mobilized, he was the first Army commander, so he saw us from mobilization all the way to deployment.
Oh, wow.
So he was very, up to speed on what the 155 was all about. And of course, I was the commander, so I spent a lot of time with him before we deployed. And I'll tell you another thing about him. I mean, he's a great man to have on your side, because when we deployed and got over into Kuwait. And we were actually having some problems getting some of the equipment, because some of the equipment that we were going to use when we were moved on into Iraq, we were supposed to pick up in Kuwait. It wasn't equipment that we shipped. And he calls me one day, and while I was there, we had one of these big tents where we had our headquarters set up. And he says, "Well, how things going? You guys got everything you need?" I said, "Well, things are going pretty good, but we got a few pieces of equipment that we haven't been able to secure." And when he hung up, and it was about 2 hours later, I had 2 colonels standing in my tent wanting to know, "What is it do you need? And please don't call that general again."
So he got things done, yeah, definitely. And we saw that, of course, in New Orleans and after Katrina, too. One of the things that struck me after, of course, Governor Bryant called you, and I know that must have been an amazing phone call for you to get that call. But I think one statistic that really jumped out at me, when you came in to your job, 95% of the Mississippi National Guard had been deployed either to Iraq or Afghanistan. So you were dealing probably with some fatigue, both with men and women and with equipment at that point. So that was probably a challenge right off the get-go, wasn't it?
Right. Well, if you look back through history, Mississippi has always been one of those states that where the men and women have had a propensity to serve in uniform, and that's no different today. So Mississippi is You know, you look at the population in comparison to all the other states in the country, we're like 31, 32, 33 or something like that.
Yeah.
But when you look at the size of our National Guard, we're 13th. We're the 13th largest National Guard in the country. And that's just because of men and women will serve their country in uniform. So when it came time for us to deploy for Iraq and Afghanistan, you know, even if someone's unit wasn't a unit that was deploying, we had men and women who were volunteering to join another unit in order to go. So yeah, we had a high number of men and women who had combat experience.
But you had a lot of very talented men and women, and the different variety of assets under you is incredible. You have everything from helicopters to MPs. For you, that had to be kind of an interesting challenge to sit there and say, okay, I've got to be a general for all kinds of different things.
Right, right. Well, when you look at the makeup of a brigade combat team and the makeup that we had back then, like you said, we had armor, we had tanks, we had Bradleys, we had artillery pieces, military police, military intelligence. We had a signal company that joined us out of Arkansas that deployed with us. Obviously maintenance. We had an engineer battalion and an attack helicopter company that out of the 101st up at Fort Campbell that went into Iraq with us.
Looking back now on the 4 years that you've been adjutant general, what do you think has been the greatest accomplishment that you feel like that you've done?
Well, we've gone through some trying times. You know, our military has gotten smaller, the Army and the Air Force, and because of that, there's been some tugs on the Mississippi National Guard, our Army Guard, and our Air National Guard. Our Air National Guard, you know, at one point was flying C-27J aircraft over in Meridian. The Air Force made a decision to do away with those aircraft, and what that did is that put that flying wing in Meridian at jeopardy. You know, we were having to fight just to make sure we could keep a flying wing over there, and through some working with the senior officials in the Air Force and then our congressional delegation, we were able to not only save the flying wing, but we were able to get those KC-135 aircraft back, which has made a big difference, and that unit has done an exceptional job. We had the same type of fights or challenges in the Army National Guard with our H-64 Apache helicopters up in Tupelo. You know, the Army made a decision that to move all the Apache helicopters onto active duty, which we didn't think was the right decision, and you know, we fought that, and today we still have Apaches in Tupelo. So, you know, the biggest challenges that I've faced in these 4.5 years is basically just maintaining what we have.
Right.
You know, not trying to get a whole lot of new stuff, but maintaining the stuff that we have. Now, I will tell you, we have made some inroads in trying to get into the cyber world in the National Guard, and we've got a computer network defense team that we've stood up while I've been here as adjutant general. And in another year or so, we're going to have a cyber protection team. We're going to partner with the states of Louisiana and Texas to form this team. Mississippi will have a slice of that. So that's one of the things, of course, that's the future.
Right.
That's where future warfare is going to be fought, is in the cyber realm. So we're getting into that.
I know it's so easy to sit there and try to fight the last battle, but you know, I mean, seriously, we're in a war with, say, China or with Russia or anything else now. It's going to be mostly cyber warfare. And also, too, I'd imagine that when you get up in the morning, you turn on the Weather Channel, and you probably hit your knees and hope that no hurricanes come in or no tornadoes or anything like that. Of course, that is one of the big jobs of the Guard, and they do that very well. Whenever there's a disaster, y'all are there.
Right.
Talk about that experience, because I know that even though we haven't, thankfully, knock on wood, haven't been hit by any big hurricanes since Katrina, more or less, you still have to make sure you get the assets out there in time.
We have to be prepared, and we plan for hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, any type of a disaster in the state. We do that. We have exercises every year that prepare us for that. And depending on, you know, because we're still deploying, you know, units. Yeah. And if we have got a unit that's part of the hurricane or tornado plan, what we have to do is then substitute someone else for them, and also make sure that they're prepared to be able to perform the mission that unit was going to do. We've only had one hurricane of significance while I've been the adjutant general. That was Isaac, and it was primarily a rain event. We had a lot of flooding down on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, but not as much wind damage, nothing that would compare to a Katrina or a Camille. But we have to be prepared for one of those. Right. You know, all of our men and women understand that's a part of our job. And the good thing about our soldiers and airmen is they watch the Weather Channel too.
Yeah.
So when something happens and you make that call to them, they've already started to prepare. It's not a cold call. Well, I didn't know it was going to happen. No, they're already prepared, and they've already started to get their stuff together. So we can put a force together pretty quickly because of that.
I look back on your career, of course, everything from going from a private to a general. That doesn't happen too often, does it?
No, I don't think
No.
so.
But I think that's what's truly made your career pretty remarkable. So you're excited about the new job.
I am. I've had an outstanding career.
Yeah.
The best part about it has been the people I've had the opportunity to serve with.
Yeah.
But at some point there comes a time when it's time for you to take the uniform off and let somebody else play for a little while. So that time has come for me.
But you definitely have served well on that. Looking back, obviously this is going to be something that you're always going to look and say this was truly an amazing time in my life, and so forth. On that, if you had to do anything over, what would you do?
I don't know if I'd do anything. I've asked myself that question. And of course, when you ask that question of yourself, you say, well, if I did that, I wouldn't have been able to do this, because everything would have been out of order. Mm-hmm. And so I think the way things happened in my career in the military was the way they were supposed to happen. I've had a lot of great mentors along the way. The soldiers I've served with are some of the best that you're going to find anywhere. The experiences that I've had with the Air National Guard for the last several years has been very rewarding. I got a chance to know a lot of them and really get to know more about their missions and capabilities. That our Air Guard is folks at very high levels in this country talk about the capabilities that we have in Mississippi when it comes to the Air National Guard. And of course the Army National Guard, everybody knows about them. Mississippi has a lot to be proud of.
Well, General, thank you for joining me today, and thank you for your service to our country.
Well, thank you so much.